I like to compare learning how to trade options to learning how to drive for the first time. If you think back to when you were younger, about to take your first driving lesson, you probably thought, how am I going to learn the controls of the car whilst also making sure I stay within my lane, whilst also watching out for the other cars and pedestrians all at the same time? It seems complicated at first, yet almost everyone with enough practice learns how to do it. Of course, it does help to learn the rules of the road from a driving theory book, but it really doesn't compare to actually getting on the road and doing it yourself. If you've been struggling to understand how to sell put options on Robinhood, then you've come to the right place. I'm going to explain how to do this really simply with a real example on Robinhood. Options trading for a new investor can seem really complex and intimidating at first. Theory does help, but you need to practice by going through example after example and learning the ins and outs and how to calculate your potential profits and losses depending on how the stock might move. And if you do this, soon you'll be able to better identify a good trade. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. I'll go over a little bit of theory at first, but I'll spend most of the time actually inside the Robinhood app on a real example, including how to select the right put option to sell and how to calculate your potential profits and losses. But like learning how to drive, learning how to trade options is also something everyone can do. But not everyone does it very well, and people make careless mistakes all the time whilst doing it. So keep in mind that options trading is very risky and you can lose a substantial amount of money if you're not careful. Hopefully, if you get good at it, you can make a lot of money, but I just wanted new investors watching this to be aware of the risks. And before we start, I did want to let you guys know that these videos take me a lot of time and effort. I think all in all, it takes me about 15 hours to do all the research, filming, editing, all of that stuff. So if you do find this video helpful, please make sure you like and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm recommends this video to more people. My goal is to hit 1,000 subs on this channel by the end of this month, which I know is soon, but I think we can do it. So if you could help me out, I would really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. On Robinhood, you have the ability to sell cash-covered put options. Selling a cash-covered put option means opening a contract where you have the obligation to buy shares of a stock at a certain price, known as the strike price, up until a set date, known as the expiration date. So if you were to sell a cash-covered put on a stock, you'd be agreeing to buy a stock at a certain price up until a certain date, no matter what the price of the stock is at that time. And in exchange for selling a cash-covered put, you receive an upfront payment from the buyer of the contract, which is known as a premium. So the reason it's called cash-covered is because you have to have enough cash in your account to cover your short put. It's also good to know that each contract you sell is for 100 shares of the stock. So if you want to sell one put option contract on the stock, then you also have to have enough cash in your account to purchase 100 shares of that stock. Now, why would you even want to sell a cash-covered put option? You would want to do this if you think a stock's price will stay relatively flat or rise in the future. The goal of selling a cash-covered put is to potentially buy a stock you'd like to own for less than its prevailing market price, or to earn additional income by selling the premium you receive by selling the contract. And this is known as monetizing your uninvested cash. If the stock price ends up staying at or above the strike price before expiration, then the option will expire worthless to the buyer of your contract. And this means you get to keep the premium that you received for selling the put. However, if the stock price closes below the strike price on the expiration date, the put will be exercised by the buyer, in which case you'd have to buy shares at that strike price and keep the premium that you received for the put. In that situation, you'd be paying above the market price for the shares, which would be a loss to you. Now, the best way to truly explain what this all means is by looking at a real example on Robinhood. So let's take a look at Workhorse stock, which is currently priced at $8.50 a share. Let's say, based on our hypothetical analysis, that we believe Workhorse's stock price will stay relatively stable, pun intended, or increase in the future. In this case, we can consider selling a cash-covered put option on this stock to make some additional income through monetizing our uninvested cash in our account. This will enter us into an agreement to potentially buy 100 shares of Workhorse stock at a certain price on or before the expiration date. So let's click on Trade and Trade Options. Then make sure you have Sell and Put selected. So now we can see a whole bunch of numbers, so let's go through them. This large white number here is what we call the strike price, which is the price at which you're required to buy shares if the put is exercised. Below that number, we have the break-even price. If the price of Workhorse goes below this number, we'll begin to make a loss. And the number on the right is what we call the options premium. This number multiplied by 100, because each options contract is equal to 100 shares of the underlying stock, is what we're actually paid for selling the put option. So in the case of this $8 option, the premium is 19 cents. So if we multiply that number by 100, the amount of cash we will receive up front for selling the contract is $19. Each of these rows here are separate options contracts. So now let's look at one of these options. Let's imagine we predict Workhorse, which is currently priced at $8.50 a share, will stay around that $8.50 price or increase in the near future. The next thing we must do is choose one of the expiration dates found at the top of the screen. It's useful to know that the further away the expiration date is, the riskier and less likely we are to profit from the contract. But because we're less likely to profit, we will also receive a greater cash premium for taking on this extra risk. And this is because the later the expiration date, the longer the time the buyer of our contract has for the stock to decrease to the price that they need to exercise the put option for a profit, which would be a loss to us as we're the seller of the contract. In this case, let's say based on our analysis that we predict that Workhorse's stock price will stay stable or increase in the next 2 months. So in this case, we can choose the expiration date that is 2 months from today. So I'm going to select November 19th. Now we have to choose a strike price for this option. Let's say we don't think it's likely that Workhorse will go much lower than $8 before November 19th. Then it might be a good idea to sell this $8 put option. Remember that we need to have enough cash in our account to cover the purchase of 100 shares of Workhorse stock at the strike price. So if we want to sell one put with a strike price of $8, then we need to have $8 multiplied by 100 in cash in our account, which in this case is $800. In this example, we'll stick to just selling one put. This will give us an upfront premium of $1.19 a share for a total of $119 in income. By selling this put, we will now have the obligation to buy 100 shares of Workhorse stock for $8 a share up until November 19th. Now I want to go over 2 scenarios that are possible when you sell a put option. These are when your option is out of the money and in the money. I want to show what the profits and losses can look like in each of these 2 scenarios. So first, let's start with the out of the money scenario. Imagine we fast forward to the expiration date and Workhorse's stock price moved as we expected it would and actually increased from the $8.50 to let's say $10. Because the stock price is greater than our $8 strike price, we would say that it is out of the money, and the put won't be assigned by the buyer of our option since it will expire worthless. This allows us to gain the $119 in total premium for the 100 shares. And this is the max potential gain on this trade, even if the stock price were to have increased further. It might be confusing to some of you that this scenario is called out of the money when we're actually profiting from this trade. It may seem contradictory. The best way to think about this is that the trade is out of the money for the buyer of our contract, so the buyer is losing money, whereas we, as the seller, are on the other side of that trade and are profiting from it. Okay, so moving on to the in the money scenario. Let's assume that our prediction that Workhorse's stock price would not decrease below the $8 strike price was incorrect. Let's say it actually decreased to $6 a share. In this case, since the stock price is below our $8 strike price, our option will be assigned by the buyer of the contract and we will be obligated to buy 100 shares of Workhorse stock at our $8 strike price. Assuming we immediately sell these shares for the current market price of $6, then we would experience a loss. To calculate our loss per share, take the price of the stock at the expiration, which is $6, and subtract the $8 strike price, and add the $1.19 premium we received for selling the put option, which altogether equals negative 81 cents per share. And since we sold one contract of 100 shares, we would multiply this number by 100, which equals negative $81. This would be our total loss on this trade, and this is the number you see here on Robinhood's profitability graph. And the last thing I wanted to mention is about the break-even price. You don't necessarily experience a loss every time the stock expires below the strike price. You actually make a loss when the stock expires below the break-even price. You can see on the profitability graph that when the stock price expires below the strike price, your profits slowly start to diminish until the price reaches the break-even price. At this point, you begin to make a loss. We can calculate the break-even price by taking the $8 strike price and subtracting the $1.19 $1.19 premium, which equals $6.81. And that's what you see here on Robinhood. And that's everything I wanted to include on how to sell puts on Robinhood. I hope you guys found this video helpful and informative, and if you're still looking to learn more about trading options, I have several other videos going over selling calls, buying put options and call options, just all that sort of stuff. But I appreciate you guys watching today, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.